Okay, so again, welcome everyone. I'm Amanda Sternberg with HAND. So welcome to the CAM RFQ workshop. So if you have just joined us, please go ahead and drop your name and what organization or entity you're with in the chat, just so we kind of know, everyone knows who's here. It is just 10:30, so we are just going to go ahead and get started just to make sure that we have time to get through everything today. So kind of the structure of this meeting, we are going to go over some expectations and information that is in the RFQ. We're going to be walking through the different application forms. We're going to talk about the different options that applicants will have on how to kind of submit an application, going over the submission requirements. We're going to spend some time also referring to different resources and supports for applicants. I'm going to talk about the review process and then some questions and answers. So we're not going to be going over each and every word in the RFQ just because we know that you all are able to, read the document on your own. But really, we're going to give kind of overall highlights of what's in the RFQ, and then again the application process of how to submit that application. So with that, and also as we go along, feel free to drop questions in the chat box as we go along. We will pause occasionally kind of, throughout the presentation as well to ask questions. So you can drop it in the chat. And if your question is something that we'll be getting to, we might just kind of delay responding to it. Okay, so want to also make sure that folks are aware of the all the materials that we're covering today are posted on HAND's website. You can kind of see the link there, all of the RFQ itself, the application forms, and the budget spreadsheet. One thing I do want to note is that there were a couple of technical corrections that had to be made to the RFQ. We in one spot, we had mistakenly omitted the amount of ARPA funding that was available, even though we do reference that in other parts of the application. And then we had referenced an incorrect question number as well. So two relatively minor technical corrections that were made to the RFQ. So that updated document was just posted to our website this morning. And there's, the corrections are noted in red font, so you can kind of quickly spot them. So nothing that substantively impacted the RFQ, but just wanted to make sure folks knew that there were just a couple of technical corrections that we did have to make. But regardless, this website, the handdetroit.org/CAM transition, is really where you're going to want to go to get all information related to the RFQ and the transition process overall. All right, so with that, just another note, it may be helpful if you have the RFQ in front of you. That might be helpful for you as we kind of go through the next piece of the presentation, which is I'm going to be going again over some highlights, broad points of what's in the RFQ. And as you can see, on the slides, where that's referencing in the RFQ document itself. I should have also said this earlier, apologize. We will be posting these slides and the recording of this meeting to our website in a few days as well. So you will always have that to refer back to. But okay, so diving into what's in the RFQ. So as you are walking through the RFQ documents, the first part of the document, as you see, we really lay out our missions and our values, both for the COC as a whole's mission and values, and then how we envision those values being embraced and being embodied by the new CAM lead agency or implementing partner. So we really try to lay out at the front end, this is what our mission and our vision is as a continuum of care, and this is how we want to see our new lead agency embody those values as well. One other thing that we lay out in the kind of the background is the idea that currently we have one CAM lead agency, that is Southwest Counseling Solutions. So they are right now the one CAM lead agency. We do have that implementing partner right now with community and home supports. So, and we'll get into this a little bit more as we go through the RFQ and the application process, but what we may see is a transitioning from that one lead agency to possibly having multiple providers implementing those services that right now Southwest manages and implements on their own. So that is also kind of described in the background part of the RFQ as well. And then that leads into kind of what these distinct roles are of these CAM services. So, and again, this will hopefully become clear as you read through the RFQ and the application forms as well. So at the end of this kind of process, or kind of the terminology that we're using, we reference the CAM lead agency. So that is and will be the overarching lead agency who will receive the HUD COC funding for the coordinated entry services. The CAM lead agency will also provide that oversight role, the coordinating and really making sure that kind of oversight body, oversight role is in place. The CAM lead agency may or may not also implement direct services. That's going to depend on what they choose to apply for. The CAM lead agency would then also, if there are what we call implementing partners, who may be other entities who would implement pieces of the CAM work, whether that be in-person access center or call center access or the back office work. Those are what we currently are in the RFQ refer to our implementing partners. Those entities would become a subrecipient of the CAM lead agency, with the CAM lead agency holding the main coordinated entry HUD grant, and then having those implementing partners as subrecipients on the grant. We also do note in the RFQ, we do currently have an implementing partner in our community. That's Community and Home Supports. They play a key role with our coordinated entry process already through the work that they do with assessment and navigation. Community and Home Supports does that work through their own coordinated entry grant that they receive directly from HUD. And there's no change that is being made to the role that CHS plays with those funds that they currently receive. So when we use the term implementing partner, know that CHS is currently one of those implementing partners, and they will remain one of those implementing partners as well. One other thing I want to say that I think you'll see in the RFQ, we may use the phrase coordinated entry lead or CE lead and CAM lead agency interchangeably. Those terms really are intended to mean the same thing. So we might use those two terms kind of interchangeably. So the RFQ and the application process is really broken down into kind of four different components. And it's these four components that applicant agencies can apply for. They can apply for either 1, 2, 3, or 4 of these key components, but we really broke them out so that an entity can apply if they choose just for that component that they really feel, that piece, that is the piece of the work that they would want to implement. So again, and we were going to refer to these throughout the RFQ as, and throughout this presentation as A, B, C, and D. So this is where kind of that language comes from. So kind of that service component A is that CAM lead agency and administrative role. So the entity who is identified to be that CAM lead agency will be responsible, so you can see, for facilitating the coordination of all the CAM partner agencies. Again, they serve as the fiduciary for the HUD COC funds, and then really involved in coordinating and reviewing feedback from people who use coordinated entry and providers, monitoring and evaluating subrecipients, just like any recipient, a subrecipient relationship would look. That CAM lead agency is also going to be, responsible for doing, ultimately the reporting that is going to need to be done, working with, certainly the other partners that are doing some of the services. The CAM lead agency is also going to have a role in the funding development to make sure that any gaps that we see in funding, that we're addressing those gaps and working to fill those gaps. So again, that lead agency is really that overall administrative role. And I should have said too, as we go through these different roles and different components. We've really structured this RFQ based on that feedback that we've received over the past months from service providers, from current CAM staff, and really just from what we've heard in terms of what would make the most sense for how this CAM structure could look going forward. So the second kind of service component, this kind of part B, is the CAM access, the call center piece. So we really heard loud and clear that we really wanted to have a hybrid form of access for people accessing coordinated entry. So that means offering both a call center and an in-person option. And so you're going to see in a moment the in-person form of access, but we also are allowing agencies to apply for just call center or just in-person access. And you'll see questions in the application that will get to, if these roles are filled by two separate entities, how will they ensure that they're having close communication and coordination? But at the end of the day, we could have one agency apply for doing the call center work and another agency doing the in-person access work. So the call center is really kind of, as the name implies, that is offering that phone-based access points, doing, triaging, doing, to the extent that diversion can be done over the phone, referring to emergency shelters, providing the specific phone access for veterans as well, which we'll get to that in a moment. For all of these, there's data collection and data quality requirements that are going to have to be met, and of course, coordinating with other service providers to facilitate client access. The other part of access then is that in-person access. So this is where the in-person access points that people can go to physically to, again, have those same type of access services, the screening, diversion, referrals, and again, ensuring a specific means of access for veterans as well. And then the last group of services, kind of part D, is what we call these back office services, which is the by name list management for chronic homelessness, youth, veterans, doing the referrals to housing programs based on our community's prioritization policies, housing choice voucher, wait list, which is a role that's expected through MISHDA. And again, data collection, data quality, there's a lot of data management on that back office piece. So entities can apply for any one or all four of these service components. So I'm gonna, I'll pause for a moment just to see if there's any immediate questions. I know we kind of just got started, but if there's any questions on kind of how those different components are broken out. Pause for just a second. Okay, and like I said, you can always drop questions in the chat box as well. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the requirements that you see in the RFQ. I'm giving pretty high level of this. They're really detailed in the RFQ, so you're definitely going to want to make sure that you review it closely. So the first requirement is related to current CAM staff. So you'll see in the RFQ, we really go into a lot of detail about the extensive knowledge and expertise that the current CAM staff hold. And because there's a short window of time on when this transfer needs to happen to the new lead agency, we really want to make every effort possible to retain that institutional knowledge that we have. So therefore, whichever agencies are selected through this process, they are required to offer interviews to the current CAM staff at Southwest Counseling, those who are employed, I think we say June 1st, still employed as of June 1st, offer them an interview opportunity. This is our way of really promoting and really trying to retain that institutional knowledge. So again, the details on those interview requirements are all in the RFQ. And so we just wanted to make sure that folks are aware of that requirement. Some additional expectations. So again, detailed in the RFQ. So on pages 17 to 13, you'll see we there's what we call the CAM services table, which really goes into a lot more detail of what those core CAM services are and how they fall in, kind of which category they fall in as it relates to access, assess, prioritize, and refer, or if it's sort of like an administrative or other role. So from HUD's perspective, they really see CAM or coordinated entry, filling those 4 key roles of how people access the homeless response system, how people are assessed for their needs, how people are prioritized for resources, and then what that referral process is. So that services table lays out the work that will be done with the the new CAM lead agency and implementing partners, and if those services fall within access, assess, prioritize, or refer, and then also kind of which of the application components, A, B, C, or D, kind of that service aligns with. An additional expectation that we have for the new lead agencies is that has to do with our assessment tool. So right now we are currently using the VI SPDAT and the full SPDAT in Detroit. Been a lot of conversations around replacing the VI SPDAT. We haven't had as many conversations around the full SPDAT as well, but regardless, the conversations have been happening locally as well as at the state level. So really what we expect is the new lead agencies and implementing partners are engaged in any decisions and discussions around the development and implementation of a new assessment tool. So just know that that expectation is there. So for call center and in-person access sites, so you'll see in the RFQ, we do lay out as well some expectations for hours of operation for the call center for both non-veteran and veteran-specific days and hours. So the coordinated entry process currently has a specific number that veterans can access, and veterans can also access coordinated access entry services at the VA Medical Center. There's currently a CAM staff who works out of the VA Medical Center. And so there's an expectation that that veteran access process remains the same, so that not only the specific call number, but also that there be someone at the VA Medical Center as well to provide those on-site services. For non-veteran access, there's also language there, again, regarding expected call center hours of operations, sort of the minimum expectation. Applicants can certainly propose more hours, longer hours into the evening or on the weekends if they have the resources, but we lay out the minimum. And we also have language in the RFQ about the preference that the in-person access sites really be tailored to household composition. So we have seen success when access sites have been specifically targeted to, say, single individuals or families. So we are really going to be looking for that as well, based on our past experiences. HMIS. So this is a big one. So applicant agencies must have experience using Detroit's HMIS system. And by using, we mean either entering data and or running reports in the system. And specifically in Detroit's HMIS system, this is going to be a threshold requirement. So applicants that don't meet this threshold requirement, unfortunately, we won't be able to review your application. The reason for this threshold requirement is that data is such an integral part of coordinated entry, of kind of everything related to coordinated entry, not only how other providers get their referrals, but it's how we as a system know what's happening in our community. The HMIS, or the data entry process, can be complex. It can be very detailed. It's not an easy lift, just to kind of make that clear. And because of that, we really need to have agencies come on board who have some level of familiarity with Detroit's HMIS system. Just again, given the time frame that we're working with, we really need someone who can hit the ground running with understanding Detroit's HMIS system to be able to get up to speed with specific workflows. There is also in the RFQ a really pretty detailed table of all of the different committees and work groups that the CAM lead agency and implementing partners are going to be expected to participate in or lead. So we really wanted to detail that out so folks were aware of what that committee and work group participation expectation is going to look like. So please just be mindful of that as well. There's also training expectations. So there's a pretty sufficient couple of pages in the RFQ regarding training requirements. We are going to expect the new lead agency and implementing partners to not only ensure that their staff are trained on a number of different topics over and above the sort of day-to-day the training that folks will need to do their day-to-day activities, but also training on things like trauma-informed care, working with diverse communities, fair housing, equal access. So there's a list of the training expectations. We also go into, expected ongoing professional development, and really what we expect training for both the CAM lead and implementing partners, internal training, as well as training and communication outside to entities outside of CAM, such as other partners in the community, to ensure people understand what coordinated entry is and what it is not. We reference the training that will be required for the technology piece. So for HMIS and Salesforce in particular, we don't give the specifics in the RFQ of what that training is going to look like, just because at this point it's hard to guess. What the training is going to look like for individual staff is going to depend on the role that they're playing, as well as their experience that they have coming into this work. But we do note that training on HMIS and Salesforce is not optional, and it may be pretty intense, just depending on, again, what folks are going to need. The COC's HMIS lead agency, which is HAND, will be leading that training and will be providing more details on what those training requirements are going to be kind of at a later date. I kind of referenced this before, but really we're going to expect that lead agency to have a process to train the broader community, again, on what coordinated entry is, how people access it, what coordinated entry is not. There's some misconceptions out there. So that really goes into both training and communication. And just a note there too, that depending on the specific component that you may be applying for, your response might be different to this, training piece, because it's really going to have to be reflective of what it is that you are applying for. We also talk a lot in the RFQ about communication expectations. So coordinated entry, it's again, we've talked about this before, it's not applying for a specific program, but it's really our system. It's really how people access and navigate our homeless response system. So communication is key, both communication within the CAM, amongst the CAM lead agency and implementing partners. If there's more than one entity, that is going to be really vital to make sure that that day-to-day work, that there's clear communication there. But then communication and marketing as well to the broader community is going to be really important, to the different service providers, the shelters, the housing providers, the broader community, the people who are accessing coordinated entry, or who perhaps don't know how to access coordinated entry. So we talk a lot about communication expectations and just really how vital that is going to be for this coordinated entry to be successful. We also detail some of the expected reporting. So this reporting requirements, this right now is really based on the funding sources, for the most part, the known funding sources. There could also always be, a request or for additional data, additional reporting. But the main funding sources right now that are available, the HUD COC funding, YHDP funding, City of Detroit ARPA funding, and the MISHDA funding, those are the kind of the four key funding sources right now. They have either annually, monthly, or quarterly reporting requirements. The data is going to either come from HMIS or Salesforce. In addition to that reporting for the funders, the COC board expects annual and quarterly reports as well on numbers served, how people are flowing through the process. And then in addition to that, we have quarterly HMIS audit reports that's headed by our HMIS lead agency. And that is a really important part of our process to ensure that the data that is being entered into HMIS remains accurate and up to date and complete. Again, just because of the vital role that the HMIS data from coordinated entry plays through our entire system. So the reporting requirements are pretty significant. We then go in within the RFQ, we talk a little bit about some of the technology requirements. So HMIS, as I've mentioned before, experience using Detroit's HMIS system is a requirement. More, again, detailed training on specific HMIS workflows will be provided, obviously. Salesforce is another key database that we use. I don't know if database is the right word, but it's a key data collection and reporting system that we use that is integral as well to the coordinated entry process. So a decision was made recently that the contract so Southwest Counseling Solutions currently holds the contract with Salesforce. That contract is going to be transitioned over to Hand. That was a decision that was made by the CAM transition team. So that contract transition will actually kind of get that ball rolling sooner rather than later. So Hand will be holding the contract for Salesforce. Whoever is identified through this process as needing access to Salesforce, so licenses, training, access to Salesforce, they will receive that. But Hand will continue to hold that contract for Salesforce. But again, the use of Salesforce is a requirement. The last note that we have there is there's has to do with the call center technology. So agencies who are identified to do the call center, you're going to have some form of call center technology. So we detail in the RFQ the system, the Vonage Contact Center that Southwest currently uses. They selected that vendor because it integrates directly into Salesforce. We are not requiring that applicants use that same software vendor, that same call center vendor, Vonage. We are also not requiring that you use a call center vendor that integrates into Salesforce. What we are requiring is that call center, whichever vendor is used, is able to essentially produce the same type of data elements and reporting out as what we currently receive. And that is, again, detailed in the RFQ. If applicant agencies want to use a call center vendor that does integrate directly into Salesforce, we do give one of the appendices of the RFQ a link to where you can find those vendors, so you can select from that list. Okay. The timeline, I'm going to touch briefly on the timeline, then I'm going to turn it over to Cindy. So applications are due by noon on Monday, April 17th. Applications are to be submitted electronically. The details on that, again, are given in the RFQ. From the 17th through April 20th, we're going to be working on getting review packets together for the committee to receive and to review. The review process will take place from April 21st to May 19th, so about a month there. During that April 21st to May 19th, we may conduct interviews with applicant agencies. So we will, to the greatest extent possible, really communicate upfront, a day or time or when we may be looking to do those interviews so applicant agencies can, plan accordingly. We really wanted to, we included this optional interview process as a way for the review committee to really be able to kind of dive a little bit deeper into any of the responses or kind of ask additional questions of the applicant agencies. On May 25th, the COC membership is going to be voting on the recommended new CAM lead agency and implementing partners. So our COC governance charter dictates that the COC membership is the body that designates who the new CAM lead agency is. And so as a part of that alignment with the governance charter, that recommendation will be going before the COC membership on the May 25th for a vote. And we'll be providing and communicating more information in the coming weeks about that special May 25th meeting, because it is kind of a special meeting in May. So again, this is the timeline. We recognize that it's really only a little out over a month from when the RFQ was released to when they're due. We really wanted to give agencies as much time as possible to respond to the RFQ, and we are under, certainly a specific timelines. After those agencies are identified in late May, we need to begin the process of transferring the HUD COC grant, so that transfer is completed in time for the new agency to submit for renewal funding in this year's competition. So more information will be provided on that when the time comes, but just noting that that's why this timeline is what it is, because we sort of have certain markers that we have to meet. So, all right, so with that, I am going to, we'll stop sharing my screen. I'm going to turn it over to Cindy now. But we can also pause if there's any immediate questions. I don't see any in the chat. So, okay. All right.
Okay, great. And so you all can see my screen?
Yep, you look great. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Okay, well then I'm going to go to the next one. So, okay. So now I'm going to kind of dive into more of the practical details of what you all are going to be doing, the forms you're going to be filling out, the budgets you're working with. So the first thing I want to talk about is the funding available. And my goal is that it doesn't confuse you, because we took a net average annual budget and realized that now we're potentially breaking it up into 4 parts. And so these are the 4 sources that you see. Obviously, the largest one, the HUD COC Supportive Services Only Coordinated Entry Grant of $959,000. And all 4 components can come out of some of that funding. The YHDP that's just getting going, it really relates to provision of B, C, and D. The Emergency Solutions Grant money from MISTA, that $36,000, that really pertains to services that fall under component D. The diversion funds we have put in for the purposes of this RFQ. When you're submitting your budgets, assume a first year annual budget of $300,000. Those funds end in 2025. You can see the broad detail in the RFQ, but that relates to access services B and C. So what we're looking at all in, and when we actually select the agencies for the provision of these 4 components, approximately 1.4 million. And the main thing to learn and glean from this funding available slide is that those final budgets, once all 4 components, we've identified the agencies that are best to provide those services. When we actually go to that MOU and the funding and the grant and the subrecipient part, there will be some negotiating, because we can't overspend and we want to maximize every dollar available. Okay. So let me move my one of my screens here so I can see. So now I'm going to kind of break it out. In the process of developing the RFQ, we knew that we had to provide guidance for applicants to kind of understand, all right, if I just want to do A or B or C or D, or if I want to do all of them, what kind of range, what is a practical, realistic budget? So because of the specific role that a CAM lead agency provides, and it's the administrator of the HUD grant, we know that you would have at least 50% potentially of the administration component, the budget line item of the COC grant. So we know that you can start out with the 43,606. And then of the broader, because we're saying you are the lead, you're facilitating communication, you're facilitating how the broader system operates, oversight, that you also would have access to a share of the supportive services line item. That SSO grant, that HUD grant, just has 2 line items, admin and supportive services. So we're saying that within all the services we want to get out of that $949,000 HUD grant, somewhere between an additional $43,000 and up to $87,000. So on the right of this this table, if you're proposing to provide A, your budget that you submit should be somewhere between 43 and 130,000. What is your management, COC management, going to look like? What are you going to do within your agency to provide that administrative support? All this is reflected. Some of this is reflected rather in the Excel spreadsheet that we will walk through. But for those of you, this is giving you kind of a guideline of where your budget should fall within the range. Now, one of the things that is going to feel complex is the RFQ. We want a hybrid model. We want that call center, but we know from the people with lived experience, from all the feedback that has been going on, that going back and having in-person access services was essential. So, but we also, during the RFQ process, decided to break out call center from in-person. So what we have done in the RFQ and is representative in this table before you is where the different pots of money would come from for all access. So that funding sources center column really should have been for both B and C as you look at it. So if you're only going to apply for the call center, you can see for B and C, you've got somewhere almost $1 million. And these are the sources. The HUD grant, you can take up to 5% of what your supportive services budget is. In other words, if you're managing part of the grant, you get a little bit of the admin money to manage your portion of the HUD grant. That supportive services budget, somewhere between 60 to 70% of those funds we want to put into the access, because we still have back office and we still have overall HUD CAM management. So we estimated that we want to spend about 60 to 70% of that HUD money, and you see that equals 523,000 to 610. The YHDP has a component for youth access, budgeted of 58,000. The diversion, 300,000. And so for the purposes of the RFQ, when you're presenting your budget for call center and or in person, that's kind of the budget you're working with. Basically, if you're thinking I only want to do in person, or you're thinking our agency really is just about the call center, you would be getting a portion of that 908 to 999,000. Optimally, if these two, B and C, were bundled into the same agency, but maybe with a partner, that would be optimal for communication, for seamlessness. But it was important to RFQ to give as many options as possible to recognize different skill sets. So to try and be as simple as possible, if all I want to do is apply for a call center and I'm submitting my budget in this RFQ, I wouldn't put in a budget of 999,000 because you basically have said I'm not going to leave any money on the table for the in-person component. So just be thinking what seems reasonable, looking at the 11 to 12, 14 current FTE that Southwest is maintaining. So this is allowing for flexibility in your budget, but understand that total funding estimate of $900,000 to $999,000 is to cover both of these components. Then the back office, again, the different components, you get at least 5% for administration dollars of the amount of supportive services you ask for. And if this money is really getting complex, I think the Excel spreadsheet will simplify it. But always remember, we're working within that right column total funding budget, somewhere between 323 and 460,000. These are the different funding sources that will be available to provide back office services. And so this gives you that budget range. So in the big picture, when the RFQ review panel sees all these and everybody asks for the max, you'll see that we'll be over the 1.4 million. That's where that negotiation will come into. So maybe you really thought it's going to be 8.0 FTE, but when all the decision came, it looks like back office will only be able to have 6.5 FTE. That'll be that negotiation that we work through. But this just kind of gives you a big picture of those budgets. In the RFQ, you actually will have a little more detail about where these funds come from, what's the grant year, to help you work through your budget. And let me go one more. I'm going to go back up. That's a lot. I've tried to simplify this, but let's take that moment because we're talking about money, which is one of the most important things here. Is there any particular question about how I've broken out the possibility of funding available for each of the 4 components? And I will rely on you, Amanda, to look at that chat or manage that if
Yep,
there's a
you bet. No questions in the chat yet, but if
okay,
folks are
good.
maybe
I love an audience that just, I'm going to wait and hold my question.
sure, but yeah, feel
Okay,
free to.
so match and leverage. So if you're familiar with COC grants, you understand match. So for that HUD money, that 946 some odd thousand, any agency that intends to draw down or to use some of that funds, you got to have a 25% match, and that's detailed in the RFQ. A commitment letter that's dated that represents that these funds will be available, cash or in kind of the resources that meets that federal requirement. And I actually have a link to that. There's a link in the RFQ to make sure that that's also a part of the requirement is securing that match. Just real quick, if you're requesting 250,000, then you need to have a match letter of 62,500, whatever that 25% is. And I hope I did my math right there. So making sure that that's going to be a part of the requirement, that's not unusual in the world of federal funding. Okay, so leverage. Part of the RFQ process, we wanted to bring in agencies because we knew that 1.4 million isn't really going to get all the things that we need. When we learned about the things that people wanted, the shortfalls, what we really wish we had, we want to have leverage be an element that other agencies could bring to the table. That would really identify other resources in the community that will enhance and improve the efficiency or the capacity of CAM services. So we added a scoring component for leverage up to 5 points. And so this is some of the, back in the day during the CSH program, HUD used to ask for leverage. So if you're asking for 100,000, we expected you to identify 100 to 200,000 in leverage. Leverage is different than cash. It's something that may represent services that aren't eligible under HUD, but we want to make sure that you have a chance to detail in your budget other resources. There may be office space that you have access to that may be valuable. You may be a recipient of another funding source that may be enhanced diversion or enhanced homeless prevention, or maybe you are going to provide in-person services, but you also have a full-on street outreach program that could really help enhance and connect people. Or you're going to do access B and C, and for that transportation piece that gets people from who have been assigned a shelter, get them to that shelter, something that is above and beyond some resources that could really help fill a gap. So it can be public, it can be private, cash, materials. There's some reference in the RFQ, and you can also Google what leverage is. And we'll look at it when we go over the actual Excel form, the percentage that you're able to present of your overall ask in your budget gives a different point level. And the demonstration of leverage is within the Excel spreadsheet. There is a hand raised.
Yeah, I was gonna say, let's take that question. And John, I see your question in the chat too. I'm not sure if they're related, but yeah, go ahead, John.
No, I was asking about the leverage specifically, because the leverage is anything above the 20% that we bring to the project. But I'm just wondering, is how is that verified or reported on? Like, that's not reported on. Right?
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if I understand, and this is just a question, I'm just trying to learn about it because I understand why it would be in there, the application, but I just don't fully understand why you would get extra points for the leverage, rather if the leverage you know, I guess the points would come in if the leverage fits in with the rest of the application. But
I think we'll do two things here. And Amanda, when we do an FAQ, maybe we'll do something specific. So leverage also can be something that is eligible. Remember the 250,000? Yeah. And so how do you prove it? You know, at some point where all of it is good faith and you have a signature page that says that by the CEO of every agency that says everything that we've applied is true and accurate and we're committed. So the only place where match is a committed letter because it's a federal mandate, right? It's a requirement. We need to see that because that has to move forward when we go to grant agreement. The leverage is about tell us as a community member, let's say I have $100,000 or $250,000 cash grant to put towards the in-person CAM services. I'm going to use 4 offices and 3 different locations in the city. That's real. I can 25% of that will be matched, and then above and beyond will be more leverage, right? The value of the square footage of the office space to provide in person throughout the community. You would just put that in there in the budget and not have to provide a letter. So it's just about being truthful with your application and just be detailed. And it may be something that the review committee may ask in an interview if it's unclear.
okay, thank you.
Can I take a moment to just respond to John's question in the chat box as well? Just
okay, I don't have chat open.
That's fine. Yep. So the question is, the awarded applicants are recipients or not? So, and I started typing a response, and so it'd be easier. So it depends. And Cindy, you can correct me if I'm wrong. So a recipient, meaning the entity that is going to directly receive the money directly from HUD or the funding source. So the entity who's selected to do that kind of part A of the services, that CAM lead, the overall administration, they're going to be the direct recipient of the HUD COC funding. Any entity that's selected to do services B, C, or D, the access or the back office, they will be a sub-recipient of that. Whoever's identified to do services A, they will be a sub-recipient with that agency in order to do their piece of the work. This one main grant that we have, we can't split it up. And so in order for us to fund different agencies to do different pieces of the work, it has to be done through a recipient and sub-recipient relationship. That's the only way we can have different partners to do different pieces of the work. The other thing that I'll add is there are also some of those the other funding sources, for example, the MISTA ESG grant, that will be available for entities who will do the back office work. HAND is the direct recipient for that MISTA ESG money per MISTA's policy. So whoever is identified to do this back office work will become a sub-recipient of HAND, essentially, really for all these other services. Maybe make it more clear, the only entity who will be a direct recipient of any of these funds is the entity who's doing that CAM lead part A services. That's all of these other funding sources already flow through HAND or the city of Detroit, the ARPA money. So, yeah. So John, I hope that helped clarify. But
and one of the this is a request for qualifications because we're transferring an existing grant. We're not going out for a whole new CAM project. So we want to retain that consistency. HUD has agreed that we're just switching the recipient, but giving that flexibility to the community that now we could have sub-recipients. And we want that even if you just want to do one of the components, we want to know that whomever is A, and maybe there's a different agency does access or back office, that they bring with them some match and some leverage to help make up that 25% of that near $1 million HUD grants. We want to make sure that it's fair and that they can there's resources available from the different agencies interested in providing CAM services. We already the threshold criteria, because these are HUD requirements, that your entity has to be a nonprofit organization or a state and local government or an instrumentality of local governments or a public housing agency. So that's if you're a for-profit organization, it's not going to work. We wouldn't consider the application. And as Amanda already suggested, a real working knowledge of the Detroit HMIS. So those are the yes/no criteria. If the answer is no on either one, then it wouldn't be, the application wouldn't be considered. And this is the kind of, we already just went over that, the recipient and the subrecipient relationship, that depending on how you applied, you would become a subrecipient. There would be a contractual agreement between CAM lead and other providers. And those other providers, when you think about continuing care grant, you go into eSNAPs, all that information, those subrecipient data and information would go into the renewal grant that Amanda talked about this summer for when we go into the COC renew cycle. And that's just something right now, Southwest doesn't have any subrecipients. They're just the recipient, but we're opening up the opportunity for that through this RFQ. So now I'm going to get ready and now go through all the different parts in the application form that are available, that are part of this. So I'm going to stop the share and actually go into the Word documents and application right there. Okay, share. Now, can you all see a Word document now?
Yep, it looks great. And just a reminder for everyone, this Word document is posted on our website at that CAM transition page. So.
Absolutely. So this is just a simple checklist. So as your grant writers and your CEO and everybody's pulling everything together for that deadline, just a check mark to make sure that we have everything. So in the next screen, this will seem more clear. Everyone does a part 1, which is the application cover sheet. Everyone does an org profile. And this is a different, if I'm going to be, I want to be A, and I'm also negotiated with partners, and I've already kind of identified my subrecipients who I want to work with me to provide my call center, and then I'm going to do the back office, that any of those implemented partners that are part of my application, I need to tell about their organization as well, because they need to still meet subrecipient requirements. So you're going to see this phrase applicant and any implementing partners, if that's the type of application. Again, it's a little complicated, but this it was strongly felt through the RFQ committee and this process that we needed to let any structural mechanism of applicant be possible. We needed to be very flexibility, not put individuals in particular boxes and how they applied. And then part 3 is the narratives about how you're going to do the job. And so there's 4 separate ones. So if you're applying for A, you've got your own set of questions. B, C, and D, questions that are specific. Each of these components, some of the questions are very similar, and then some are very, very specific to the service delivery model that you're going to do for each of the 4 components. Then we have a work plan, budget, a signature page, and all the different attachments. Again, this is just a checklist for you all. Okay, now I'm going to scroll up, and can you see applicant cover sheet?
Yes.
Man, I'm always going to look for you to say yes.
Yeah, it took me a minute to find my unmute. Yeah, you look great.
Okay, cool. Okay, now this is the cover sheet. This is going to be, and literally just when you're thinking about putting this in, this is in Word documents. Just go in and start working on the Word document for your files. These are going to be for yours. The applicant organization, and what you see that implementing partners, if you are bringing in other organizations, you have decided I want to be A, and I want to have other partners. We still need one primary applicant, and then name your partner organizations and who they are. This will just help make very clear on the cover sheet. And so this is, I'm going to scroll up, and this is something that I'm hoping I've made it as simple as possible. The 2 types of applications you can be. One, all services applicant. Meaning I'm the main applicant and I have found either myself, my organization, or myself and partners, we're doing it all in. We've got an application for A, an application for B, C, and D. We've got that part 3. We have put together an entire coalition of CAM service providers, or maybe just my agency, and we're going to do it all. So that's that first decision. Am I doing it all, or am I just doing select services? I'm just doing back office. I'm just doing in-person, or I'm just doing B and C, or I'm just doing a CAM lead agency. So this is that first decision to make, and just literally in the Word document, just check the box, right? Just check it, and then there's a second decision. If you're doing it all, if you are applying to provide all 4 CAM components, this is another requirement. You can say, I'm all in. Take all of me or don't consider me. I built this the system, and I don't want to have any subrecipients that I didn't already pre-select for myself. That would be all in. That's this checkbox here, all in, except all. I don't want to die. I don't want to split up any of the entities. Or yes, substitution allowed. I've applied for A, B, C, and D, but I recognize perhaps that maybe that back office work, I'd be cool with the RFQ review panel bringing in someone who presented a better application for D. So this gives you the chance to say, I want to do it all, but then, you know what, I'd be willing to let the RFQ committee replace my D with a higher scoring D. And that just tells the RFQ committee kind of how to walk through the application. If you're just to select a service proposed, just select what you're doing, and then just put in the total budget amount that you're asking for. So just checking a box. If I'm all in, I'm checking A, B, C, and D, and I'm putting the total amount requested there. Any questions about that applicant type and the allowance of substitutions?
I want to make one more clarifying thing, and then we do have a question
Yes.
that came in the chat. So really, so just to make sure everyone is super clear. So if you are interested in applying just for that select services only application, say you want to apply just for call center, in-person, or back office, you will become the subrecipient of an entity who you're not going to know at the front end. Whoever's identified to do that CAM lead agency, lead agency role. So just be aware of that you are essentially saying, yes, I'm willing to become a subrecipient of, at the time of application, an unknown entity. I want to there's a comment in the chat. So question is, in the case that multiple agencies would be working together to answer the RFQ as a proposed unit, would the implementing partners then also be submitting their own separate applications for their selected services, or would they work together with the lead, agency A, on one full application? So it's going to be one application. So you'll see, hopefully I'm understanding the question correctly. So say, one agency, and as Cindy said, you've identified, we want agency B, C to do these other pieces of the application. It's going to be one application. And then you're going to answer the relative questions as it applies to those other entities. So, and Cindy, I think we'll get to this in a moment. So there's the part 2 of the application are overall organizational questions. You're going to answer a part 2 for each agency that you name in your application. So if there's a total of 3 agencies, you as the lead, and then 2 partner agencies, you're going to complete part 2 3 times for each agency. We want to know each applicant agency's organizational experience and background. And then likewise, you're going to the subsequent, parts for each agency. And then there's going to be some attachments that you're going to need for each entity. So the 501c3 eligibility documentation, the signature page needs to be signed by all. So all right. Jill says they answered that question. So great. Any other questions? Oh yeah, or clarification that we can make regarding this all in substitutions allowed piece of it. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions, so we can go ahead. And again, feel free to drop questions in the chat.
If you do have this is perfect. And to some degree, it makes sense. That's because we've been living this for a couple of months. But this was all about allowing flexibility to agencies. That's why it's complex. If you're like, why do we do? Well, it was to allow absolute flexibility in how a providers would be selected. So this is part 2, organizational profile. Again, just like I went up there, if you have multiple partners, they need to complete one of these. So you would have I put my agency, and then if I have these subrecipient implementer partners, I've got their name, and they've each. So if I have 4 partners, I'm going to do A, and there's going to be a B, and there's going to be a C, and there's going to be a D, and I'm splitting it all up, then I'm going to have 4 part 2 forms in my application, because remember, they would subsequently become subrecipients, and we need to make sure that their organization type is a nonprofit or a PHA or a unit of government, that they have a SAM.gov registration, the unique identifier, and a copy of their registration, and then their tax ID number, their employer ID. These are the things that we want to make sure way up front that they would qualify to actually be a subrecipient of a federal grant. So this form goes in, there's a lot of questions here, so be prepared, you grant writers. The different questions about the organization, about your experience with grants, state and local. Again, these are checkbox. Use this Word document and just write right in it. I mean, directly describe how, and just start writing right in the application your response. There are no word limits in this whole application, but be succinct and specific. But we didn't want to put any limitations. There are going to be some over the whole application where you really need to dive in to your solution or something unique and a strength about your organization. And the other thing that I didn't note, you'll see throughout the document points per question total, so that you understand in the larger picture how they're going to be evaluated by the RFQ review committee. Data and technology questions, you're going to see that all these questions begin to reflect back on the requirements within the RFQ, the expectations within the RFQ, and the absolute capacity. We talked about data, tools being used, quality and monitoring, references to HMIS, security and privacy, not that different from a COC or an ESG grant, training requirements. And you can see the points, a lot of questions, very specific about how you're going to address those. This where there may be differences, because if I'm only doing the call center, I may really dive into the trauma-informed, motivational interview, the empathy, making call center soft skills training, things that are very specific about client-facing skill sets that we have, that my agency has or we intend to bring, or access for COC training. So there may be some differences there. Vision and values, they're literally cited both in the RFQ and here. Describe how you're going to address these different things, cost systems. So pretty self-explanatory, and just know that if you have other partners, intended subrecipients, we need to see this document for every one of those organizations. Okay, I think there's a new chat question, is there?
I'm having a hard time getting to my unmute button this morning. The chat, I answered it. But just to make sure everyone hears it. So the question was essentially, does the community partner need to be a 501c3? So really any entity that's named in your application has to meet that eligibility requirement, which is being a nonprofit, a unit of local government, or a PHA. So that basic eligibility, and have experience in Detroit's HMIS system. So that eligibility criteria is going to apply to any of the agencies identified in your application.
I believe in the RFQ, it went through a few iterations. There's at least a link to HUD that explains the difference between subrecipient and contractor. Like your call center technology is the contractor. It's you're going to procure things. So the difference between procuring or actually having a subrecipient. because obviously, you know,
Yeah,
bondage
that's a
is
good point.
private
Yeah.
sector.
Yeah.
Just to make sure
Yeah.
that you might, if you're not certain, there may be some clarifying.
Yeah.
That might be helpful. Is that it?
Yep.
Cool. Okay. Now, if you want to be the CAM lead agency, obviously we have application organization name, because if you're A and you're the lead, you're not handing off my lead to another agency. And so again, you're going to see a lot of emphasis about financial management, because you would be playing the role of a subrecipient. In other words, you pass through money, expediting those payments, how you manage subgrantees, more additional information other than just the organizational profile on financial management, measuring performance, managing performance, serving as that lead agency, serving in oversight, making sure all that reporting is done by your organization and or other CAM partners, what the funders require, the emphasis on communication and coordination that we talked about, and it's pretty extensive in the RFQ. There's internal communication, there's external communication, there's user communication, service provider communication, knowledge transfer and staffing. This is a part of all A, B, C, and D, saying, okay, the resources that are out there. One of the things that Amanda mentioned in the RFQ, there's actually stuff already done by Southwest. You're going to inherit the, the CAM website. There's a lot of tools and material that are listed in the RFQ. So there's a lot of things that don't have to be recreated. They just need to be transferred and how you will use them. So you might want to, especially if you're going to be a lead, go look at what's out there, what you think that you can bring to the table, how you're going to use existing resources, including staff, including the materials and training materials that are there, how you would enhance them or how you would implement them. Any questions on A? Okay. CAM access. Again, these part 3 forms really dive into the very specifics of that service. Because B, C, and D, you could, if you wanted to be an A and you've got a partner, we would put my agency as the applicant organization, because I'm the primary applicant that has gathered all these materials and submitting into the RFQ. But name the provider if you have a different provider who's going to provide that call center. And if you're in all services, am I going to do it, or make sure that we understand that so we can begin to match organizational profile to the actual service. CAM resources and knowledge. We want to make sure that the individual providing call center has that scope and understands what it means to be an access point. Diving into some of that service model, and you can see here these questions 9 through 13 were 20 points apiece. You can see kind of putting that emphasis on your service delivery model for integration, the utilization, how you're going to provide, how you're going to work with other call centers or call or resources within the community, and again, knowledge transfer and staffing. Okay, I don't see a question, so I'm going to just keep moving because this is pretty self-explanatory. Access in person, really similar to the provision of a call center, because this is that hybrid model. So we still need you to serve youth and veterans and individuals and families. And how will you integrate? This will be really important for any agency who is splitting out in person and call center to really understand how that they will work together, because this is about being person-centered in our CAM. The phone works for some, it needs to be in person for others, so it needs to be very seamless. But again, the same type of questions of knowledge, your delivery model, thinking about in person and the expectation and the hours and being diverse and how clients will get there. Asking about your service delivery model, and the heavier points being about that section, questions 9 through 13. Again, replicating knowledge transfer and staffing. How are you going to utilize existing services? Okay, I see that there is a new chat question.
Yep, the question is just clarifying if there's a word count limit on the responses. And so again, no word count limit. We are really just asking that you be succinct and concise. We wanted to certainly give applicants the opportunity to give their response. However,
Yeah.
succinct and concise. So that's what
Yeah,
we said.
it's a lot to read.
Yeah.
But there will be the ability, let's say there are 4 organizations who present in-person CAM solutions, right? So I'm going to have 3 delivery models to compare, 3 different CAM knowledge that the RFQ committee can kind of compare to. So being succinct and specific, organize it, can be narrative, can be bullets, can be strategy. And then there's a couple other forms that you're going to be completing that this is that narrative response, walking people through how you envision your implementation and how you're going to use existing staff and resources. In the back office, the same thing. If it's you or if you actually are going to sub it out, again, CAM knowledge. Back office is a little different, right? It's very data intensive. The by name list, how HCV process, referrals, coordinating with access points, coordinating with community and home supports, looking at how you're going to solve those very unique technical skills that are a part of being the back office, how you will use the CAM knowledge. Okay, and so this is implementation work plan. Now this is less narrative. The work plans. Now, if you have an A, B, C, and D, if I remember correctly, we want 1 work plan for the applicant organization, not 4 work plans. And Amanda, tell me, that's what I intended.
So our instructions there, they are say complete a separate implementation work plan for each individual CAM service.
Okay, we did do that. Okay, and I apologize, y'all. Yeah, so this is really, it's going to serve a lot of purposes. Number 1, it will convey, it helps you as an organization to realize that this is change management, that we have an existing service that's going to transfer a component of it to your organization, that there's a lot of moving parts, and that we know from an organizational standpoint that you're viewing this from a project management standpoint for the community to try and make this change as seamless as possible. And so we've created just a work plan, and there's a few examples in here. These were just me putting in examples for you to be really succinct and like bullet out. And there are 4 stages: onboarding, from the time the COC membership votes on y'all, and we're going through the different contracting, getting my organization ramped up. Then there's the phase of transition, right? We're unplugging one system and plugging one in, and that's going to be a phase. There's going to probably be some parallel going on. Stabilizing operations. Once it's all you providing call center, or all you providing in person, or all you doing back office, thinking about how you're going to stabilize operations, different strategies, and then evaluating operations. After we've done our first 90 days, January 1, 2024, or in 2024, how you're going to, right? You're going to review, monitor, tweak, improve, communicate. And then, so of these 4 columns, then on the left, you see the kind of categories. Let's just talk about finance. What's my finance? What am I going to do when I'm onboarding? What's my to-do list for when I'm transitioning? That may be updating match commitment letters, making sure that funding's there, stabilizing operations, how am I going to evaluate? I would suggest that there doesn't necessarily have to be something in every single box, because it might not be germane to what you're applying for. CAM lead agency is probably going to have a lot of boxes, right? It may be oversight, it may be evaluation, onboarding, transition, and stabilizing. Most of that's probably going to have something in there. You can see my examples. Facilities and equipment. If I'm doing in person, I know that on onboarding, I may need to get some office space lease with Southwest, or use some, or secure something else. What's the transition look like? And I may be thinking about funding requirements, lease agreements in place, partner coordination. And so we give some examples. This is basically going to be kind of your to-do list to demonstrate that you understand the processes and the procedures of managing the CAM operations or working with other individuals. When you get this Word document, erase everything I've put in there. They're just prompts to have you think about things that relate to the RFQ, everything you put in part 3, all those narratives. Now, what's my work plan? What's my to-do list to help organize? Okay, I don't see anything. Okay.
Well, maybe just to clarify, Cindy, when you said erase everything you put in there, the things in italics. Well,
Yeah, yeah, like delete that and put your
yes,
own.
the item on the far right column or the left column,
Yeah,
those are the key
thank you.
points we do want you to
Yes.
respond to.
And
Yeah,
I mean,
yes,
you
yes,
are.
the examples you can get rid of.
Okay.
Yep.
Any questions before I go to
Nope.
the Excel spreadsheet?
You can keep going.
Stop share. Okay, share and
And yeah, so the spreadsheet that Cindy is pulling up is also on our website in the Excel format. And you'll see in the RFQ instructions, we do want this submitted as an Excel spreadsheet. Sometimes when you convert Excel spreadsheets to PDFs, you can accidentally cut things off. We don't want that to happen. So submit your budget spreadsheet as an Excel spreadsheet.
so spreadsheets can be wily things. But because remember those funding availability, there's ranges and flexibility. You're not put into hard boxes. Like there's not a notice that says you've gone $5.37 over budget allowed. That's not in here. This is an unlocked Excel. This gives you some flexibility. There on the bottom where you see the different worksheets, simple instructions. I try to keep it simple. Complete it, look at your summary and match, and complete the leverage. So basically 3 parts to do. If you're applying for multiple components, you're going to have multiple spreadsheets. Now, when we think about HUD, COC, SSO, supported services only, we have a link to those costs. And as Southwest knows, and some of you know, when HUD created the budget line item is just supported services, but there's actual eligible cost. A lot of different technical things that sometimes don't really translate into a real budget for your agency. We've provided a link there for you to refer to, but in our different worksheets, we try to really simplify it because this RFQ, remember, is a qualification. We have an existing grant. We're not wholesale turning everything upside down. We have personnel cost and we have other costs in there. So I wanted you to just be able to, the instructions, try to keep it as simple as possible and you'll be submitting it. So when we look at, I'm going to look at one of the budgets and they all pretty much look the same. Put your organization name there just in case when Amanda and I receive all these, we make sure that it's identified. So our documents. So we've taken the eligible budget line items. I'm looking at the left column and really kept them to high level of the basics: personnel, the staff to perform the duties, office space, rent and utilities, equipment and office supplies, training, professional development, direct client assistance as actual funding that provides assistance to clients, any HMIS cost, administrative or other. And these are, like I said, they're not locked in. Anytime you see a yellow cell, I did put a formula in there so it would auto calculate. So if I'm doing A and I remember back that it was like up to, I'm forgetting, like $150,000, that was our high end range. When I'm putting in my budget proposal, I'm going to know that I want to stay within that budget range. Same for B, C, and D. So just trying to keep this as simple as possible. I ask that you not manipulate it too much. You may be adding line items. The other thing about each one is that these are actual drop-down menus. There are 4 funding sources: the ARPA diversion money, the big HUD SSOCE grant, the YHDP, and the ESG. And so referring to the RFQ and referring to that slide that we showed you, that ARPA diversion is for B and C for access point. that the YHDP has a couple of components that you could apply for, that you'll want to identify the source of that money as you're developing your budget. Access center, the call center, you can see I try to keep them exactly the same. And hold on, I need to move it. In person, same line items. I put other in case there's something different that you may have to give you some flexibility. Back office. So all these component budgets are the same. Now, budget summary and match, based on those cells, they should come forward. If you really manipulate the Excel spreadsheet and mess up the formulas, then just make sure that they balance, and that'll be part of our work as well. So we can see your total requests that you've asked for. These you're going to fill out, and there is something in one of my forms. Sorry about that. I'm going to delete that. The funding sources, we know that ARPA is $300,000 a year. We know how much money is in SSO. This really just gives us idea of which pots of money that you are drawing from. And then this is where you're matched. Now you're going to have a letter, but put your match in there. It could be foundation cash. It's $50,000, and this number here, these are, if it's blank, you need to fill it out. $150,000. There will be so for some reason that's and then it'll calculate the match, and you want to make sure that's 25%. So trying to keep it simple. I see a question and I want to stop.
Yep. Yeah. So I'll get to the question. Also, just want to make one clarifying comment too. So if you are submitting an application and you're applying for, let's say, all 4 of the services or a few of the services, you're still there's only still going to be just one budget spreadsheet, overall Excel file that you submit, but you're just going to fill out the multiple tabs. I think Cindy, you mentioned multiple spreadsheets. We don't mean multiple like Excel files, one Excel file, but then you'll complete the appropriate tab or tabs for what you're applying for. So just to clarify.
If I'm an all-in applicant and I've got a B and a C and a D, I'm filling this out for
all tabs. Yep.
Okay, good.
Yep. So the question in the chat has to do with match. So the question is the lead agency required to provide the full match, or does each entity provide a 25% match for their portion of the HUD SSO, or can one of the implementing partners provide all the 25% match? I would say it's really up to you. And it's from, I would say also kind of from HUD's perspective, in the world of having a recipient and subrecipient relationship, some entities do it differently. Some where the recipient takes care of all the match, sometimes they pass some or all of the match obligations onto their subrecipients. Sometimes it's a combination, everyone contributes. So it's really going to be up to you and how you work that out with any of the partners that are going to be a part of the application. At the end of the day, what we need to see is that the match obligations are met, essentially.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And this is just another way to make sure you got your math right.
Yep.
Yeah. There's another question?
Nope, we're good to go. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I saw another one.
Oh, she just gave me a thumbs up.
Okay. Leverage is, again, we're seeing how much and the value of leverage. And this is just where, to the question I think John had earlier, this is broken out. There may be different leverage, but depending on what you're applying for, just so that we can see what you brought to the table. And you're just going to describe what it is and what its cash value is, and then it'll be prevention. So if you have no leverage, you get no points. Up to 20. If I'm asking for $100,000 and I've got $25,000, I've met 25%. And this is just another point system, both to get you thinking about what other resources you bring to the table for your component. And this is where you would put it. And so it's just name it, describe it, give its value, and then it will calculate the percentage for point given. Any other questions there?
Nope, no additional questions.
Okay, I'm gonna go, all right, stop share. And now I'm going to go back to So there were also, these are the attachments. I think it's pretty clear. The requirement, those you will attach and try to and do it in order. I know Amanda go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then put in the 7. So as far as grouping, if you have multiple agencies, try to keep all your organizational, put all your part 2s together, your 3s and 4s. I don't want to get too crazy about that, but because of the way you're submitting it in PDF, I think we'll be able to organize it in such a way that makes sense to the RFQ committee in preparing the RFQ review packets. So we went through that. Support, having been someone who's applied for a lot of money over the years for different things, we will have an FAQ page, and so kind of taking those high-level questions and just like this HUD does, and have those published. I can't imagine us being able to really go beyond Friday, April 14th, because they're due on the 17th, so that everyone has a transparent access to the same answers. I will also do an office hours on Monday. That'll basically be an open Zoom meeting, and to transparently help you through something doesn't work. You can always email Amanda. Either she, and if there's something that I need to assist with, she'll forward that to me. But giving you all another opportunity to get some help a couple weeks out before it's due.
And I'll just make a note that that link to that Zoom meeting on April 3rd is also posted to HAN's website under the CAM transition page. And again, it's sort of like an open house. You come and kind of come when you need. It's not going to those office hours is not required, but it's an opportunity for you, it's a resource if needed.
Yeah. Now it's all right. The scoring, I'm sorry, I forgot. This is the scoring. This is just a copy of the rubric that's in there for where the points are coming from. That will be part of the evaluation by the review panel. And questions?
Yeah, so there's no more questions in the chat, but we can, I know that we're coming right up on 12, but we can certainly pause for any questions. Folks can feel free to raise their hand and come off of mute or drop things on the chat. As you're doing that, just again, as I mentioned at the top, we will be posting these slides and the webinar to the website to give us a little bit of time to get the webinar cleaned up. We will also, so the questions that came in today as well, we will type up the responses that I maybe have given verbally, and that will be on our website. That will be sort of the start of some of those FAQs. Again, we'll be updating that FAQ document kind of as things go along. I would recommend that you just kind of check in on that piece of the website. Frequently we'll indicate, most recently updated as of this date or what date, so you'll know as those questions are updated. So, all right, there's not seeing more questions in the chat. All right, so we acknowledge that this is a pretty significant application. It's pretty long. There's a lot of questions, a lot of details. As we said at the front, coordinated entry, it's not just another program, it really is, it's a system. And so that's why this is a pretty intensive application process. So thank you for showing interest in taking over this role. It really is such a vital piece of our homeless response system. It is how people who are experiencing homelessness or housing crisis first access the system and get those resources that they need. So it is a really just sort of vital piece to everything we do. So with that, seeing no more questions, I think we can close this webinar, and thank you everyone for your time this morning. And I'm sure we'll be in touch soon. Thanks all.